Tonight's guest wishes to remain anonymous, and with that in mind, I'm just going to call her Kendra. Kendra, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here, Vic. Thank you for having me.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for your time. Kendra, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
I'm about 54 years old. I have 3 grown, wonderful children that live all over the place. I have 3 wonderful dogs and a cat.
Sounds like you've carved a good life out for yourself.
I sure try, Vic.
Well, that's great. That's how it should be. Kendra, you were pretty upset the first time we spoke about your encounter, but where are you now from a mental standpoint?
I really feel a lot better about all of this since I talked to you. I mean, I hadn't really talked about it. It's been nearly 5 years. I didn't even realize how bad I felt about it and how still scared I was every day. I can tell you I still think about those glowing eyes every day, but at least they're not as poignant as it was. They're kind of fading now. I'm not ready to go walking in the woods by myself yet, but maybe I can. So that's a lot better than I was.
Well, like I told you, in good time, I think you will get there, but please don't forget to take baby steps. There's no rush. The woods aren't going to go anywhere. They're going to be there.
You're right. I need to think of it more like that too, but I hope to be able to take the dogs for a walk down there.
Well, I hope you can too. It's coming. It's just going to take time. You mentioned that it's been about 5 years since you've even talked about that encounter. I know that you told 2 people about the experience, but who were they?
My son I actually only told him maybe about a month ago. My boyfriend, though, I called him right after the experience because I was totally freaking out. It was really, really early in the morning, too, so I knew he was still up, but this was during COVID, and I would say late January of 2020 while driving to work. And recently, I actually told my mom about it on Thanksgiving, but before that, nobody knew. Only my boyfriend and I for years until very recently, within the last month or so, 2 months.
Well, it's not easy to talk about an experience like that. I get it. Do you think the isolation you experienced during the pandemic is one of the reasons why you had so much trouble dealing with that encounter?
Probably. I mean, when I was working at the Quarry, that was considered to be, you had to go to work. I wasn't off any of the time that everybody else was off for COVID. I went to work every day. They were considered essential due to the maintenance of roads, basically. So I was an essential worker. I actually carried a letter in my car just in case I got pulled over that said, yes, I'm supposed to be out on the road. I am an essential worker. But thinking about how dark it was there and even at the Quarry where I worked, that was on my mind quite a bit.
Oh, I'm sure it was. I bet it was on your mind all the time. Did your job there at the stone quarry require you to work alone in remote areas out there?
Yes, I was in the scale house, which was not attached to the office. It was on the actual opposite side of the quarry. So like management was over at the one office near the river, and then I was all the way in the back, closer to the woods, actually. The woods surround the quarry except for where it's on the river, but there's several hundred acres that are involved in that. Yeah, and I was supposed to be at work by 5:30 at that time, and then they actually made it closer to 5. So I was leaving for work at like 4:30 in the morning. It was a good 45-minute drive, but I always, left myself a little time in case something happened, or I wanted to stop and get a coffee or something. I tried to build 15 minutes into my commute just so in case something like maybe I got pulled over or hope I didn't have that or a flat tire or something like that. I still do it now, too.
Yeah, that couldn't have been easy at all. And speaking of not easy, almost any scale house I've ever seen at a place like a quarry was just nothing but windows. Is that how yours was?
Yes, it was all windows. Actually, that's funny you say that because I used to think that I was almost like a zoo animal. Like everybody could just see in. I didn't necessarily be able to see anybody out there in the dark. But yeah, and it was really dark then because it was winter. So the sun wasn't coming up to what, 7, something like that. And I would work until 4:30, 5 o'clock every day. So it was a long day for sure. And it was dark. And there was a lot of wildlife there. A huge amount of wildlife, actually.
Wow, you poor thing. Yeah, that couldn't have been easy. I'm sure it goes without saying you kept that door locked, didn't you?
Oh, yes, all the time. That door was locked 24/7. Even if I was in there, people would have to knock, or if they had a key, of course, management had a key, but they would knock. And that door had windows on it too. The only place in the scale house that there was a small little tiny bathroom with a sink and a toilet that didn't have any windows. But, obviously you don't want windows in there, really.
No, definitely you wouldn't. Did you do anything back then to try and make it easier to get up and go out into the darkness to leave for work and then to get to work in the dark and sit in the scale house alone? Did you ever do anything to try and lessen the difficulty of doing that, or were you just stuck having to do it with no relief?
I was stuck having to do it with no relief. I mean, I would have loved to have told you I would have loved to have brought a dog to work with me, at least just nothing else for the company. But obviously that creates a liability issue for the quarry. If your dog bit somebody or something like that, then that would be a problem. So I wasn't allowed to do that, but I would have loved to have done something like that. Not that they could protect me from one of them, but maybe just having somebody with me would have made me feel better. It got awful lonely in there, especially during COVID. It wasn't very busy. So there were long days just sitting there all day by myself.
Wow. Yeah, that's not easy at all. I feel for you, I really do. You didn't get a very good look at the dogman that you saw that morning. Do you see that as being a good thing or a bad thing?
I think both, actually. That's funny you say that because I've thought about that. The thought of actually seeing the entire portion of that, I think would have been much more traumatic. So even though I was traumatized by what I did see, I'm really glad I didn't see the rest of him. I mean, I think it was a him. I don't know. I just always kind of thought it was a him. But those eyes were bad enough just to scare anybody. I mean, really, it was quite terrifying. I don't even think that even starts to tell you how afraid I was. Terrifying is just the only word I can think of that conveys part of that.
Yeah, when you see big amber eyes like that are that far apart and that size, it really does cut down on the chances of what it could possibly be, especially seeing them as high off the ground as they were. But I don't want to reveal too much, and with that in mind, let's talk about this encounter now. Please give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Okay. This is in northern Harford County, Maryland. I was driving to work like every other day, didn't think much about it. My boyfriend at the time was not working during COVID for obvious reasons. He wasn't considered essential, but I was. So I would get up every morning about 3:30 and, kind of get myself together. And I would usually leave out about 4:30 in the morning. And I took the same way every day. There wasn't much traffic out on the road, I will tell you. And most places were open, like Wawa or, Highs or some small little place convenience stores. So I was about 8, 9 miles away from home, and I was in a residential area. It's really right outside on the outskirts of Bel Air, Maryland. And it was actually called Prospect Mill Road, which is part residential on one side, and the other side had some open area, like that had been a farm, and they were a sanctuary at the time. It's only 30 miles an hour there, so I know I tried not to speed because there wasn't many people on the road. So really the police were quite active trying to, I guess make their quota every month. So I was really careful about that because it was really easy to go faster on that road. It was pretty much straight all the way up until you get close to the school. So I was probably about halfway through the residential area, and it was pretty much pitch black. There's not many street lights on that road, and the headlights on my car were not great. I will tell you, I did have the brights on, but they had a recall for it because it was so bad. But the brights, if I didn't have those on, I couldn't barely see 2 feet in front of the car. So the brights were on, and all of a sudden I caught something out of the right side, like diagonally right. It was in a yard, and there were these huge, bright yellow eyes. They were very large, and I mean, like, probably the size of a baseball, like, really big. They were pretty high up. There's an elevation right there where the house was kind of up on a little bit of a hill. I mean, not a big hill, just like a little bit higher elevation than where I was on the road. So that may have made it look even bigger. And of course, I was sitting down because I was driving. And there was a very big tree there, and I could only make out kind of like some of the branches. As I was driving, it almost appeared to be in slow motion. Like, I think I took my foot off the gas. I don't know for sure, but just because of how slow it felt, I think I did that. And I was locked in with these eyes. I couldn't even seem to like look away. If there had been something in front of me, I would have probably hit it. But since they were off kind of to the right, and they were moving, not fast. I think that at first they were moving more, but I think when we, and I say we and it, this creature, this very large creature, we just kind of locked in on these eyes, and I kept thinking, oh God, it's looking at me. And I was like, no, it's not looking at you. You know, it sees the car. And then, which is probably the scariest part of all of this, in my head, I heard, no, I'm looking at you. And I was like, oh my God. Like, I have never been so fearful. Please no, I don't go out to the woods. I mean, I used to ride horses all the time. I would trail ride, but never in the woods. It would be more like in, the field or whatever, or an open area, like, the telephone pole or electrical outlet lines. I would do that, but never like in the woods. There just wasn't any trails in the woods where I rode. So I just haven't been out there like that. And when I heard that in my head, that was the most frightening part. I mean, this thing could hear what I was thinking. I mean, so monsters are real now. I've been told all my life, no, these things don't exist. They're fairy tales, whatever. And now not only do monsters exist, because I'm looking at this thing, not only do they exist, but they can hear what you think. So, I mean, think about that. If you think about that, like if you were trying to escape this, it can hear what you're thinking. So it knows what you're going to do. I mean, he was traveling in the opposite direction of me. And as soon as I heard that, and I kind of broke eye contact with it, I just floored it. And I really didn't care how fast I was going, honestly. I mean, I'm sure I would have gotten a bad ticket, but I didn't care. And now, at the time, I had no idea what this thing was. I want to kind of describe this thing or how I saw it, even though I didn't see much of it. It was standing or moving very slowly at this point near a very large tree that had some pretty thick branches off of it. I do believe that there was some pointed ears up there. I do think that they were not something I could see, that I think a branch was in front of that. or maybe some dried leaves. Something was in front of that. But I do remember seeing some points up there. It was blacker than black. And I will tell you that it was really, really dark anyways, but it was blacker than black. And it just really faded in with that. The tree was so dark anyways. And even the house, I think the house was like a dark red brick. So there wasn't a lot of contrast in there, but these eyes were just haunting. Like I said, they were very, very large. And when he told me in my head that he was looking at me, they kind of moved forward a little bit. And that's when I think I was like, oh my God. And I literally took off. He seemed to move and keep going in the opposite direction, which I will forever be thankful for. Like I said, Vic, I did not have any idea about these things. I did know about, people had reported seeing Bigfoot, and especially in the, Pacific Northwest. And I've always thought, well, if that many people are reporting this, it has to be real. I mean, these people don't know each other. They're from different walks of life, different times, since, all the way back in the 1800s, and Indians, Native Americans have known about these things. So if you got all those people reporting that type of thing, I do believe that that's real. It's kind of like with aliens. Are we the only people in the universe? Absolutely not. I do not believe that we are the only people here, or not necessarily here, but in the space. You would have to be pretty much thinking that you are the only thing in the world to be thinking that we're the only thing in the universe. So, but I didn't retroly just think about that. I didn't just say, oh, okay, well, this thing I had no idea what this was. I was trying to convince myself it was an owl for the longest time. And I was like, no, this is not an owl. Owls don't have self-illuminating, glowing eyes. There was no light. This wasn't a reflection of the eyes. This was, they glowed by themselves. They were lit up by themselves. And they were very bright, very round, very big, and pretty far apart. I would say, I'm going to tell you, I think about 4 inches apart. And I can tell you that because we stared at each other and obviously he was looking at me, not the car. But yeah. And I just kept saying, what in the heck is that? And use your imagination. It wasn't heck, but I was just like, wow, what the freaking is that? Over and over.
Whew, you scared me. Sorry. Please continue.
They were big. And oh, you made me laugh now. Well, thank you, because I was getting a little bit too intense on those things in my head again. Yeah. I'll never forget this as long as I live. I imagine even if I got dementia, I'd still remember those eyes. So what happened was I called my boyfriend in the car. Please don't think that I was breaking the law or anything. I did have, Bluetooth. So I called him and I was talking to him. He's like, calm down. Like, I was just like, blah, 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 talking very, very fast. And he was just like, calm down. Tell me what happened. I'm like, these eyes, they're huge. They were glowing at me, and oh my God. And he was just like, calm down, start slow. And I'm still driving. And then I was at the stoplight and I was like looking all around like, oh my God. And then as soon as it turned green, boy, did I let go on that. And no, I didn't stop anywhere that morning. No, I drove straight to work, and I was kind of freaking out. The good news was there's a fence around the entire quarry, and I did have a gate opener. So the gate opener would unlock it with the same push, and then it would just open. And I would close it behind me because I didn't want all the trucks starting to come in before we actually opened. So, but I was by myself on the other side of the quarry with nobody around. There's lights around the scale house, but that's it. And I have to unlock that door, right? So I ran to there, and I can park really close to it, but still, you're out and you're vulnerable. So I ran right to the lock, and I had my key out. I went boom and turned around and locked it right away. Not that that really would have helped me if he really wanted to get me. I was only so I was halfway there when I saw this approximately. So I was only about 10 miles from the quarry. So there's no reason why I'm sure that they have very large areas where they inhabit. I would think that this was within its range. Also, please know, we did have a lot of wildlife at the quarry. It was tons of bald eagles everywhere, and there was nesting pairs. It was right on the Susquehanna River, so the eagles would go and get fish and bring it. They raised their young there. Every year they would come back. Huge nest, very up high in the trees, but I mean, I could take pictures of them all day long. There was deer there, so many, possums, wild cats, the regular domestic cats, but they were wild. Like I said, this thing was surrounded by several hundred acres they owned. It included wetlands, and we would have environmentalists come over and check those out monthly for doing research. We would also do quarry tours for kids, not so much when COVID was going on, but prior to and after. There was deer. There was a baby fawn there, and a friend of mine that worked there too. We actually got some, what are those trail cams? He got a trail cam, and we put it out there because we wanted to see how many times the baby fawn came out. It didn't really work that good because it was infrared, and the one light that was at there was kind of not making it. It was on all night, so it wasn't making so you could see it really well. But yeah, there was a baby fawn. There was tons of foxes, so many foxes that there was actually down inside of the quarry. There was a building that the guys would go and eat lunch. There was a couch in there and things. Well, they started feeding the foxes. So the foxes were coming in there all the time. We actually had to hire somebody to do away with the foxes. They had to come and trap them and take them to another location. They were way too domesticated, I guess is a good way to put it. At one time, there was even goats in the quarry. One of the managers at one time brought a couple goats down there, and they loved it because, they would climb up the mountains and everything. But there was coyotes there. I saw coyotes all the time, from every shape, size, and height you can think of, from little tiny ones to really large coy dogs. There was a bear at one point that was shot in town because it was a Saturday and DNR couldn't come relocate it. So they actually killed the bear. But so, if there's a bear that was down in town, I'm sure there's bear around there. The whole thing, like I said, it has a fence around it. However, nobody walked this fence. Nobody knew if it was completely intact. I mean, they could see where it was intact from where they can see when they go around on the trail or the road back there, but nobody was checking fence lines all the time. So, and it's a very active quarry. I'll still tell you, it's still there. I worked there for 5 years. I wound up leaving, I think it was 2021 or 2022. I can't remember anymore. I'm pretty sure it was 2020. I think it was like early April of 2022. But I worked there for 5 years, and I was just done with them. But that's a whole nother different story, Vic.
Was it a mixture of being frustrated with work and having that Dogman encounter that caused you to leave, or was it strictly politics at work?
No, it had something to do with that Dogman encounter. I was encountering these coy dogs and these coyotes all the time. I will tell you that as soon as I got back to the scale house that day, and like I said, we weren't very busy during COVID. I mean, we still had some trucks, but we really weren't that busy. I really started researching after I told myself there's no way that thing was an owl. I started doing some research, and I actually found you. You were the first thing that popped up during that research. And I started listening to the YouTube encounters. I mean, most of the time it's just, a picture, right, of a Dogman or something, or you might change that picture during that time. And I would do the filing I had to do and, recount my cash and, make sure the ledgers were all correct. I did payroll for the quarry. So I was doing payroll, but I could listen to that and still do everything. And that's when I really started finding out how prevalent these creatures are. And I was there by myself all day, unless there was trucks there with truck drivers. I will tell you that the truck drivers there were great. I knew most of them just because they came in all the time. I mean, they would bring me flowers sometimes. They'd bring me a Slurpee, coffee, whatever. I didn't know them. And if something had happened and there was one of them around, I think that they totally would have been there to help me. But for the most part, I was there by myself. Yeah, I would say it had a little to do with both. I would say management was a good portion of that, but I really didn't want to be by myself all the time.
Well, I don't blame you. Yeah, I figured it was at least a consideration behind why you left there. I'm wondering, though, did anything ever happen around the scale house that made you think that it just might have followed you to work?
I didn't see anything, but after listening to a lot of your podcast, some of these things run around with these coyotes, right? I mean, I will tell you that we had a night shift that would work down at the quarry, but the quarry was down and around and up, and it was pretty far down there. I was not close to it. It was probably a mile away down there, but it was down multiple levels. It was actually below sea level where the Susquehanna River is. It was actually lower than that, and they would collect water and wash stone and stuff. But there was a big coy dog one day. This is probably in the spring. This thing was so big. I'm about 5 foot tall. I'm not real tall, like 5.5 feet. I would have said that this thing, it was as big as my German Shepherd dog. My boyfriend had a German Shepherd and I had a Shiloh Shepherd. So it was as big as they were. I'm going to tell you that my Shiloh is 27 inches at the withers. And I'm going to tell you his German Shepherd was probably about right the same. But this thing was that tall. So you think about that, 27 inches at the shoulders, that's pretty high. But it was lean like a greyhound. Like you could see the muscle. I'm a smoker, so I went outside there was a front porch on the scale house. And I would sit out there, well, not sit, but I would have the door open so I could hear if the phone rang or see if one of the trucks was coming. But it was out in the middle of the quarry road. It stayed there so long and was staring me down that I actually went into the scale house, grabbed the binoculars that I used to use to see the truck numbers, and I walked, and they were nice ones. They're bush elves. They were nice ones. And I took those and I was eyeing this thing up. I mean, I could see it, but I couldn't see detail until I had the binoculars. This thing was staring straight at me too. So I was like, wonder what friends you have, I mean, that's literally, I was looking at it going, wonder what friends you got. Where are they? If you're sitting here staring at me, the vultures would come. This is really creepy too, Vic. There was a pond on each side when you first came in past the gates to come into the quarry. And there was like 4 or 5 vultures sitting there. Have you ever seen a vulture when they air out their wings?
Oh, yeah.
So there's 4 or 5 of them sitting there with their wings kind of out, but they're sitting on the ground. I mean, that's kind of creepy too, just to let you know. There's so much wildlife. I do kind of miss seeing all the wildlife. I don't want to see one of those things again, or even those coy dogs, because that thing was not afraid of me at all. And honestly, if I had been out somewhere and just saw that thing could have ripped you apart. I mean, it was pretty menacing as well. Not as menacing as that Dogman, but, and you know, the other thing about that Dogman, I felt like hate, like it, just disgust and hate from this thing. It had to have been, it had to have been at least 9 feet. I would say at least that. I mean, it looked way higher than that because I was so down from being on the road and it having a hill and then up, and but it was so high up there. But this koi dog, it freaked me out too. Not as bad as that, but I didn't want to be by myself anymore.
I don't blame you. And koi dogs, they can be dangerous. I mean, they are part dog. They don't have the natural fear of humans that coyotes have, so that can be a problem. And I can't believe that you would sit there in the scale house all alone in the dark and listen to episodes of the show. That couldn't have been easy.
It would get daylight. It would get daylight too. But yeah, I would listen to you all the time. I mean, so the quarry actually opened at 6 a.m. for the scale house. So I was usually there for, in the beginning, it was only about a half hour, but prior to that, it was about an hour. They started having me come in earlier, which is a whole nother reason. But then I'd be there for like 2 hours in the dark, right? I mean, the scale house is lit up, but yeah, you can't see. I mean, I know there's lights out there. Like there'd be a light where the scale house is, and there was a light over where we had some vending machines and like a run-in horse thing. I know that sounds funny, but they did. They had a run-in shelter and they put vending machines in there for like the truck drivers for sodas, waters, whatever they wanted to buy. But the next light was way down there. It's not anything that was close. I'll tell you, there were so many coyotes over there. I called down to management and said, "Hey, there's a bunch of coyotes over at the stone drop." Well, let me tell you what a stone drop is. So when the truck gets on the scale, it can only carry 20,000 pounds. Unless they have some special thing from Virginia, yada, yada, yada. That's a whole different thing. But it could not weigh more than 20,000 pounds. If it weighed more than 20,000 pounds, I could not print a ticket for it. So they would have to go and dump off stone. And that was the stone dump off place. So a lot of times they had like a little chute in the back of the dump truck that they could open to let some stone out. But these are people that are getting out. The truck drivers are getting out of their vehicles and actually opening these. So if there's coyotes running around there or koi dogs, right? Because there was both, somebody could have gotten injured pretty easily. So I called down to management and told them about it, and they just blew it off like I was out of my mind. Like, why do they care? So, yeah, Vic, that's scary.
It is scary. And it's good you did that. At least you looked out for the drivers, but yeah, it doesn't surprise me the company couldn't have cared less. It's unfortunate, but that's just how it is. You described its eyes as being yellow. Were they a pure yellow or a sort of yellowish orange?
They weren't pure yellow. They had some orange in them, but they were huge. I mean, huge. I don't remember seeing a pupil. Just what stays with me are those yellow, amber. They weren't dark amber though. Like I've heard people describe it like a beer color. It was lighter than that, but there was a little bit of orange in there. It wasn't complete just yellow.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a sight you're never going to forget, unfortunately. How far was it from the house in that front yard where you saw it standing behind that tree?
I'm going to say that it was probably only like a few feet from that. I think they had like a front stoop there. Because remember, I drove it every day, right? So it's not like I didn't know where the house was. I sent you a picture of it. You know that. But obviously we can't send that for other people to see because we don't want to give somebody's address, right? But it was probably only a couple feet from that stoop, if that. And for me, I'm not very good with like far away, but I'm going to tell you, it was probably like 30 or 40 feet from me. It wasn't a huge front yard. And there was an elevation, so there's a small hill there. It was mostly flat, though, on that hill. So I think it was like man-made, if that makes sense. Like when they excavated it to build the house, I think they kind of made that for like water, so water runoff. But it wasn't that far from me.
Yeah, sounds like it was way too close for comfort. When it mind spoke with you and said, "No, I'm looking at you," did it do so in a harsh voice or a calm one?
No, it was a harsh voice. And I would consider myself pretty empath like that. And the stuff I was feeling from this thing was just hate. Like it just hates everything, everybody. Like it was kind of felt like meeting somebody that just hated the whole world kind of thing. That's what it felt like to me. Like it was, it wasn't nice. It definitely had a feel of, malice in there.
Yeah, that's textbook Dogman behavior. How long did it take you to find out about how many other eyewitnesses have reported experiencing mind speak?
I only found that out after I looked you up, and it's not as many as you would think, right? I mean, a lot of people have encounters with this thing and it doesn't do that. But yeah, it definitely said that to me. I didn't come up with that in my own head. It wasn't me thinking that. It was definitely put there.
Yeah, it doesn't happen all the time. Actually, far from it, but it is reported by credible eyewitnesses such as yourself. It's hard to understand, but it happens. Now that you know monsters are real, what kinds of other doors has that opened in your mind, Kendra?
Oh my gosh. I mean, that really opens it for everything. I mean, if you think about that, that means anything that you've probably heard of could or might be real. I mean, if you get hundreds of thousands of reports of a rake, well, I didn't necessarily believe in rakes before, right? But if you're getting 100,000 people that are telling you about a rake or that's out there, that they've seen it, I'm going to believe them because I never thought these monsters were real. They were something out of a fairy tale, right? But no, they're real.
The world is a much more comfortable place when you don't have to worry about things like that being out there, but as you know, unfortunately, they are, and that's a bitter pill.
It is.
It really is. How compromised were you after coming to the realization that monsters actually do exist?
I used to live my life pretty carefree as far as that. We lived on 3 acres. I never locked my doors. I didn't even know if I had a key to that house when it became prevalent that I needed one. But I never locked the doors. And the basement door was always open. The garage was always open. We'll leave the windows open all the time until well, that's a different story. That's a different kind of monster, stink bugs from China. But until they would come and try to get in the house. But I would leave windows open all the time. There was nothing better than sleeping in the fall with a little breeze and it gotten chilly at night, we would go out there and have bonfires, and I let my dogs out all the time. But I'm telling you, there was crazy things that you'd hear out in those woods. My boyfriend was like, "Did you hear that? What was that?" And I'm like, "Honey, that could be anything now." I mean, yeah, the sky's the limit with what it could have been, right?
Well, I'm so sorry to hear that you weren't able to enjoy the outdoors the way you once were able to. You couldn't see its ears well at all due to how black it was, but did you see them well enough to get a feel for how tall they might have been?
Well, with the branch in the way, I'm going to tell you probably like 3 inches, 4 inches. I only saw like tips of them. That's why I can't swear on my life that they were actually ears, but I'm pretty sure they were. I mean, either that or it could have been like a bumpy part in the branch, but they were pretty evenly spaced. That's why it just really seems like they were ears. But I would say probably like maybe 4 inches tall.
Well, those are pretty big ears still.
Yeah, they're bigger than my shepherd's ears. Much taller.
I'll bet they are. Your mom told you an interesting story that's related to what we're talking about tonight, Kendra. Please tell us a story behind that.
Well, on Thanksgiving, I picked her up to go up to my daughter's house. I actually told her, I hadn't told her in 5 years either. I told her about what happened and my encounter with this thing. And she told me about a story that when she was, like 11 or 12, so we're talking back in the 50s, probably, late 50s, she was visiting up near the Chattahoochee River in Tennessee. And it was a wooded area. They were visiting relatives, and my mom had taken her friend with her. And the two girls were getting ready to go, get into trouble. Not trouble, but what girls do at 12, go play in sticks and blah, blah, blah. And a gentleman that was there that lived on the property, I can't remember what she called him, his name or anything, but she said that he told her that my mom and her friend, he told them that they needed to watch out for a wolf boy. And I said, okay, well, first of all, did you see the wolf boy, Mom? She said, no, I didn't, but I thought it was interesting that he said that, especially after what you just told me. And I was like, yeah, that is kind of interesting. But I did tell her, I said, there's been sightings of this thing since at least the 1800s, authenticated sightings of this thing since the 1800s. And it goes back even further if you think of Egypt and the Anubis and all of that.
Well, considering the fact that she had that experience, did her ears really seem to perk up when you told her about your encounter? Was she really interested, or did she kind of blow it off?
No, I mean, she believed me, and she asked me several questions about it, kind of like what you were asking me, like how wide apart the eyes were, how tall do you think it was? And then I think she totally believed me. She told me that story, so I would definitely think that she was on the same page. She didn't have that encounter with the wolf boy, but, I would have asked her what the heck it looked like too if she had. Interesting if maybe it was a Dogman pup or whatever they called a wolf boy before.
Considering the fact that that experience had been shared with her, you'd think she'd really be interested in your experience, but you never know with people. That's why I asked.
Actually, the biggest thing she said to me, and it really actually made me realize how much more upset about it than I even realized I was, is she said, you mean to tell me that this thing has been bothering you for nearly 5 years? And I was like, yeah, I didn't really realize it had been almost 5 years ago. But she's right. It's been almost 5 years, and this thing has haunted me for that long.
I hate the fact that it gave you so much trouble, but I'm glad to hear that you're doing better now. Thank goodness for that.
Thank goodness for you.
Well, thank you. I just feel lucky to be able to help. Your son had an interesting experience of his own. What happened to him?
I think back in like 2020 when COVID was pretty prevalent, he was living in New Mexico, Santa Fe, New Mexico, actually. He doesn't live there anymore, but he did then. And they had like an app that a lot of like the teenagers and 20-year-olds were doing on their phone. It was like they would think of something and then touch the app button that would say whatever, and then it would give them coordinates of where to go. And supposedly, if you thought of this thing and you went there on the map, you would find the thing that you were thought of. So he and one of his best friends at the time went and did this, and it took them out into the desert, which, not surprising. It is New Mexico, right? And there was a guy standing there, and it scared them so much they just took off. But I thought that was interesting that there was anything there that they were going to look at. So, yeah, I'll ask him. You know what, Vic? When I find out what that app was called again, I'll ask him. I'll text you and let you know.
Huh, yeah, I never heard about that app before. That's interesting. I know there was that one app where you could hunt Pokemon, but I never heard about this app, so that's new to me.
They did that too, but no, this was a different thing.
And I've yet to find any Pokemon using that app, so that's a waste of time. But anyway, the Dogman you had that encounter with, mine spoke to you. We've established that, but do you think that's the most frightening aspect of the encounter?
I do, because if you think about that, if they can do that, they're in your head. So let's say, this is what it made me think about. Let's say you have an encounter with this thing and you want to get away and you're thinking of how you're going to get away, right? Like, I'm going to run through that door, jump through that way, whatever. It already knows what you're going to do because it knows what you think. That's pretty terrifying if you really think about that.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it gives them every advantage. It really does. Well, we're about out of time, Kendra. Before we get out of here, though, do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Just, if you're going out to take the trash out, you need to look around. It could even be during the day. Just because I saw this thing when it was dark doesn't mean that that's the only time they're out. They're definitely out during the day. And I know people are like, oh, I go out only in the day. Well, that's not going to help you. You're going to see it coming, but you might not. They're very sneaky and very quiet. I've learned that just from listening to your shows, Vic. And just people need to keep their head on a swivel and mind their surroundings. And if they have an animal or a dog or something, your dog's going to alert you. May not be like they want to go fight it for you. They may be running from it, but, pay attention to those things.
That's very good advice. Even if dogmen aren't out there in your area, it's always a good idea to be very wary of your surroundings. You never know what might be a threat. But having said that, thanks again so much for coming on the show, Kendra, and sharing that experience with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Vic, for all you do for us. I can't tell you, I've been dealing with this thing for nearly 5 years, like my mom said, but I talked to you on Friday and I actually do feel better about it. Like, you were able to kind of put things in context for me. And you're right. If that thing wanted to come get me, all it had to do was go and pick the car up or push it over or whatever. I would have been it. There's not much I could have done about it.
That's right. As long as you keep that in mind and keep the right perspective, it's all attitude, how you look at the experience. As long as you remember those 7 magic words I shared with you and look at this accurately, then you've got this whipped. It's going to take time before it truly sinks in, but yeah, you can definitely do it. I know you can.
Oh, you've been very helpful with that. And I do believe you now. If somebody had asked me 2 weeks ago, I don't think I would have believed them. But yeah, you really, really did help me kind of deal with it and put it in perspective. And I will always be grateful for that.
Oh, you're welcome. Having said that, thanks again so much for your time and have a great night.